Today's event is the Europas 2020 FieldHouse Associates webinar on communications for startups. This will be a sector deep dive into the comms and PR world to understand how the ongoing COVID-19 crisis is impacting the tech industry. So what exactly is PR? When it comes to startups, this term often gets bandied about as if cracking PR will lead to a flood of customers or partners and propel startups to superstardom. But in this workshop, we're going to examine and unpack what communications can and cannot do for startups, and what the objectives of communications should be, and how, beyond the headlines, it should be measured. Now, to those participating and watching and listening, please participate, as it would be great to get your feedback. You can do that by asking questions in the chat box. So just pop questions, comments in there as we go, and as it occurs to you, and we'll address them during the panel session or towards the end as appropriate. This discussion is also being recorded, and the recording will be shared with you all afterwards. And don't remember, you can also network with participants at the Europas Awards during all of the sessions in our Slack community. And you should have got an email about that. If not, then contact us. So just to introduce myself, my name is Mike Butcher. I'm the editor-at-large of TechCrunch, and we'll be getting to the panel very shortly. But we're going to get our first poll up. And this is an opportunity for you guys to give your view on PR right now. So let's get the first poll up. Has your startup used external PR to build its profile? Yes or no? I'll just give you a moment to answer those questions. We're going to give you a. It'd be great to get all of you piled in on this question. Looks like I love the way it updates live. Fantastic. So the question again, has your startup used external PR? That's, external to your company. Could be an agency, could be a freelancer, etc. So it looks like we got up to 29. Let's give it maybe a couple more minutes we'll give you 10 more seconds, and then we'll end the quiz, shall we? Answer okay. And okay, looks like we've got to, I think you should be able to see, and I can certainly see that we've got to, majority of people have used external PR to build their profile. A significant minority, 38% say have not, so it's typical startup land, and but about 60%, that was a great, 55%. Fantastic, very useful feedback there. Bringing to the table a wide range of perspectives on PR and its impact, from the founder view to the marketing lead to the investor perspective, as well, of course, the PR expert view. Joining us today, we have Cordelia Meacher, who's the founder and managing director of FieldHouse Associates. They're a PR specialising in the fast-growth tech and investment space, which has recently launched a specific PR product for startups called Basecamp, which we'll no doubt be hearing about later. Also joining us is Simon Menashe, a partner at early-stage venture capital firm MMC Ventures. Also Caroline Plumb, OBE, the founder and CEO of fintech startup Fluidly, and also involved in and organising the COVID-19 volunteer testing network. And finally, David Keane, who's the former head of marketing strategy and operations for Google in EMEA. Cordelia, if I could turn to you quickly first. For those of people who don't necessarily understand what PR is, public relations, could you explain how it differs from marketing and why early stage companies in particular should consider investing in it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really quite simple. The difference is marketing is direct to your customer. So the company comes up with a message and sends that message direct to its audience. However, with PR, we're looking for third-party endorsement. So if a journalist or a publication or an event organizer is willing to have you or your company and endorse that, it's obviously a much stronger message than if it just comes straight from the customer. And it's all about trusted source and validation. But the reason that companies should have PR at all is to help them meet their objectives. It's not about column inches or number of pieces of coverage. It really should be about what are you trying to achieve. And for early stage businesses, getting to a funding round, trying to hire good people, expanding geographically, even just launching the company in the first place. That really meeting the objectives is what you should be looking to do.
Simon, is it a sort of thing that you advise all of your startups to do?
I think at the right time, yes, but it depends on, like Cordelia said, what's the outcome they're trying to achieve at a particular time. And quite often that might be before they want to go public at all. It might be preparatory work around honing their messaging, defining their audience a little bit better, and getting a little help with their tone of voice, and figuring out what the strategy might be later. And then often it's around a particular moment in time, which might be a launch or it might be a particular marketing campaign. But I don't think it's right for all startups all the time, and it gets misused a lot. So maybe we'll talk about that in a bit.
David, when you were at Google, did giant tech companies take notice of the fact that a startup might be getting mentioned in the press? Was that useful as a third-party validation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I 100% agree with what Cordelia and the others have said. I think the key thing there, both at large companies like Google, SAP, Salesforce, where I've worked, and also where I've been a CMO at startups, is PR is addressing multiple audiences, whereas your marketing is often addressing a very specific customer segment where you're trying to particularly drive demand or build some kind of nurture program. And the way that we would look at it would be, PR would tackle three big areas. The first one would be, you still want your customers to know about you and how wonderful you are. Awesome. Second one is you'd like to hire people and you want talent to come and join you. So PR is awesome for that. And then finally, you want investors and you want the industry to be cheering for you. So that kind of ability to address the industry and potential investors out there is really, really key. So it's a much broader brush piece and it's very much at the top of the funnel.
Caroline, you're the founder here in this group, and very much an entrepreneur. When do you see the balance between doing your own PR as a startup, as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and involving external relation agencies?
I think David's point, it slightly depends on which audiences you're trying to connect with. Our go-to-market initially was very focused on the trade press. We look to support small and medium-sized businesses that are closely connected with accounting software. So our early PR was very focused on building relationships with niche trade press. And actually that was something that we wanted to do direct and have those long-term relationships. When we came to evolving an external agency, it was much more for kind of brand, strategic, more corporate objectives that are around positioning as the brand as a thought leader, or attracting talent, or making people more aware about the business overall. So we had quite different objectives when we had internal and external agency support.
Very interesting. David, Cordelia's made a strong case for PR being entirely strategic and tied to growth objectives. Why would you enlist an agency? When's the right time? So, there is obviously a right time and a wrong time, depending on the objective, as Caroline mentioned. But when is the right time to get a PR?
Day one. So, it's short-sighted if you think that you can just focus on using paid or organic lead generation to drive your business from day one. It's a short-sighted view. You need to start to establish your brand. You need to start to figure out your identity. You need to start to grow your business and tell people who you are, why you're making a difference, and how you're changing the world. So I would encourage people, even if they have a much smaller budget, I would really encourage people from the earliest possible time when they can afford it to bring in some kind of external support in this area, and not to put every penny that they have, and apologies Google and Facebook, but not to put every penny into paid advertising, but to actually put a chunk of that money elsewhere, because it really does pay off.
Cordelia, when do you advise a startup? Do you ever turn away a startup saying it's not the right time for you guys?
We would sometimes turn people away and say, you're not quite ready, or don't spend the money on external agency at this point. I think that's about sensible business consultancy advice. But really, it's in the planning. And to David's point, the most disappointing and worrying email we receive is when, could we have a chat this afternoon because we want to launch next week? And, please don't do that, anybody listening, because there is so much work to be done before then. What do you want to say? Who do you want to say it to? What are your key messages? What are your proof points? And we need to build that case before we actually go public and live. And then when we do go public and live, we're saying the right thing to the right people at the right time.
Simon, when you speak to your entrepreneurs, your portfolio startups, what do you advise them? Do you say, when they come to you and they say, we think we can do really well out of PR for this product or something, do you say, you sort of shake your head, or do you boost their ideas?
I think normally they say, how do I get Mike to write about me? And I say, hang on a minute, let's have a broader conversation about PR here. I think the mistake that a lot of founders and other kinds of marketeers make is believing that PR is a direct response channel, and that as soon as you get an article in something with some reach, whether it's the press or TV or something else, you're going to acquire floods of users, and that just very rarely happens. I think PR needs to be seen as a way to enhance your positioning. So you need to know what your positioning is first, and you need to know the intersection between your position and the kind of cultural relevance of what you're doing. And that doesn't just mean latching onto a news story, but the audience you're speaking to, what are the other things that they're thinking about more broadly, and the journalists that are talking to that audience, what are they writing about? I also think it can be a very complementary tool for direct response channels. So, first of all, it's an SEO enhancing channel. Achieving backlinks from high domain authority websites is one of the best reasons to try and get coverage from. It could be a big mainstream publication, or it could be something more specific to your industry. And that authority transfers onto your marketing, onto your website, and thereby your other marketing channels. And it's about reputation and posturing. So that could be for hiring, it could be demonstrating thought leadership in your industry. It might be something to do with trying to achieve a particular corporate partnership or next funding round. So I think as a complementary activity to everything else you're doing in marketing, I would advise all of our companies to be thinking about it at the right moment, and that does start with some preparatory work. But as Cordelia says, it's not about, we have a thing now, we need to launch tomorrow, we're trying to sell this product and get loads of users to sign up.
Caroline, when VCs, when you talk to your investors about PR specifically, not marketing but PR, do you often find that the VCs say, "Oh, I know a journalist," or I can introduce you? Do you find that VCs themselves often try and become the external agency?
I have to say, I don't really talk to my investors about PR. It's not a conversation that we really have very often. Partly because I think it is, it's part of the overall brand objective and corporate objective. I don't think, and also perhaps I might not regard the VCs as the authority on that. I'd rather talk to someone who is focused on having, really knows the space. And so it's perhaps not something that I would look to a VC for introductions on, or a kind of pet journalist that they might have a relationship with, partly because I have a lot of those relationships myself, but also that actually I think it's back to what are you trying to achieve, and do you really want that introduction via a VC, or do you want it via someone who's a professional in the space, or because you've got a narrative or point of view or timing that is an inbound story in itself, and that's sort of focused. And to the kind of point around not using PR just a week before to kind of launch something, the only counter to that actually is, I think, when it's very timely. And I think FieldHouse supported me brilliantly with the launch of the COVID-19 testing network, which was really something that it's a not-for-profit organisation that's to support the testing for antigen testing for COVID-19, and to build a strategy of having not just these centralized government labs, but a whole network of local labs delivering testing, which, remember, way back at the beginning of the pandemic, our testing capacity in the UK simply wasn't there. And so, really the opportunity to deliver that network of labs, which we now have tens of labs testing all over the country, delivering thousands of tests a day to support the government, was very much had to be an inbound PR-led effort, because there was no way we were going to be able to outbound that number in that time.
Right.
So it was very short window, that narrative. I wrote the press release and drafted it really quickly, and then worked with FieldHouse to get it out. And it was of the moment, and the timing was right. So even in a very short space of time, it was able to be executed and delivered very effectively.
I see. Cordelia, do you often find that VCs, investors, try to muscle in on the whole PR narrative with the startups and say, I know a journalist, or I can do this, or whatever?
No, not really. No, I mean, I think unlike Caroline's experience, we've had lots of VCs introduce us to their portfolio. Obviously, we end up doing work with the portfolio on their fundraising announcements anyway, and then that can build a relationship. Or very often a VC will come to us and say, I've got this company that needs some help, can you help them? But not in the interfering element, no. And we have a fine line to walk too, because obviously as FieldHouse we work with investors as well as the startups and scale-ups themselves. And so a line has to come where we're no longer working for the VC, but working for the portfolio, and then that shifts across to them, and then they've got to decide whether they want to invest in PR themselves. But no, usually we find investors to be really helpful and to understand, and certainly not try to muscle in.
Right, interesting. Yes, from a journalist perspective, sometimes I find that investors don't disintermediate. They're more that the startup doesn't have an external relations agency, so that I hear often from investors as well, but that's probably a different conversation. We're going to get up to the timing for our second poll now. So the second poll is all about the biggest growth challenge you would like PR to solve for your company. And as you can see, the answers are there: access to investment, access to talent, boosting sales, opening doors for partnerships, raising personal profile, or securing an exit. So if you would like to just click on that poll, it would be brilliant to get your feedback. We're going to give it about a minute for you guys to pile in there. I'm just wondering, I can see the results coming in live. Can you guys see it? Can my panelists see it?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. Okay. We seem to be getting Okay, we're getting some votes, but they're not updating live. It was updating live before. Perhaps somebody switched something off in the back end. But looks like we're going to get to the end there. So,
Cordelia, it looks like you're the most prolific fundraising helper around in the market. Then, if it's all about access to investment, did you know you were in corporate finance?
Do you know what? I actually think we do know that. It's one of our biggest things that we do, is helping startups get to funding.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see that's endorsed.
So I think we're gonna we've got quite a good number of people who've voted, and I think we'll give it just 10 more seconds to vote. If you could just vote, that would be great. I'm not seeing live results for some reason, but
we can see it, Mike.
Okay. Seems to be, so maybe there's a glitch at my end. I think we're going to end any minute now. So, access to, did you see that?
Boosting sales was top, then access to investment, and then I didn't get the order of the rest, and securing exits was right down at the bottom.
Oh no, it's gone.
Okay.
Oh, it's gone.
Right.
It's all right, we got the key messages.
Well,
investment.
You want to comment on that, Simon?
Yeah, I'm surprised that that founders think that PR will I guess, get them access to investment. I think maybe I would interpret that in the same way as we were talking about marketing. It won't get you users, won't get you revenue, but it's a really strong kind of partner activity and channel to the other things you're doing. So, I think the fact that a startup gets mentioned in the press, it probably gets you into the CRM of really organized VCs who are trying to understand the whole universe and ecosystem of startups out there, but it probably doesn't get you through the door into that first meeting. I think what's also helpful though is, when a company, when a VC does get approached by you or about you, Googling your company and then up pops a New York Times article or a BBC article. I think that's contextual, kind of reputational weight, which is quite useful. And then, I guess just commenting down the other end of the table, really nobody said securing an exit, and maybe, I don't know if people are near to that who are on the call here, but I mean, actually PR can be one of the strongest, maybe not immediate response, but over a very long time, ways of getting to the sort of corporate audience who ultimately might be a trade buyer of your company, hearing about your company, what they're doing, what they're achieving in the market over a long period of time. So I wouldn't forget that piece. Cordelia,
would you concur? What are some of your comments about the results of that poll?
Well, I think there's a magic sauce in the background going on, Simon, of the way we get people to get in front of you. So absolutely, you're right. It's about touch points, isn't it? So if you get a pitch across your desk and then you Google that company and you saw them speak at the Europas and you read about them in TechCrunch and there was an article in Forbes explaining why they have expertise on the subject matter, it's just a much more compelling a pitch for you, and you'll read it and take it more seriously than if you Google them and all you get is their website. And then the other thing I would say is that the good PR agencies, of course, the FieldHouse is one, we also help with direct instructions. So if you're choosing an agency that's within the right place for you, then PR should be more than just media. It actually is wherever you need to access anything outside your company, public relations. So we spend a lot of time working on companies' pitch decks, helping them with their speech, the talking to the pitch deck, and also with direct instructions and those warm leads.
Now then, Caroline, you're, as the entrepreneur on the call, I understand you only recently turned to PR for Fluidly for the first time, just before the pandemic hit. So could you tell us how it's affected your plans? Also, perhaps a bit more about the COVID-19 volunteer testing network and the role that PR played in terms of responding to the news agenda. Firstly, your own startup, and perhaps also about your testing network.
Yeah, so I think I always see PR as part of a inbound strategy predominantly to kind of create gravity almost for the business that kind of makes it an exciting place that things then are attracted to, and it brings in their own pieces. I'm interested in Simon's comment a bit that investors aren't influenced by PR, but I know many startups that have got PR and then systematically reuse those articles and retargeting investors with Twitter and LinkedIn so that investors get to see it and they think they're seeing it organically, but it's not, they've been targeted. And then they wait for the phone to ring. And I think it's a fantastic strategy. So I think trying to get like that excitement and buzz and create gravity has always been our objective from PR. Although we did it internally at Fluidly initially because we targeted trade press and it was very customer-centric PR. And I think it's easier. You can get PR yourself as a founder for fundraisers, for direct relationships. You don't have to engage an external agency for some of those things. And if you want to get off the ground quickly, it's easy to do. But I think where we work with an external agency in FieldHouse is because we had wanted to position the brand to different audiences beyond the tech press that might be interested in covering fundraising, or beyond our trade accounting press that might be interested in covering cash flow, but actually to talk to wider audiences that perhaps we don't have a direct connection with. There we felt external agency were particularly valuable for us in managing those, and that's why we kind of turned to it then. In terms of the COVID-19 testing network, that was really just super timely. We were launching a network of labs. We had a lab that was already testing GP surgeries, and we wanted to turn not just the one lab that we had that was already running tests for GPs across Oxfordshire. We wanted to get another 20 labs like that across the country. So we announced the launch of a testing network with one lab present and doing 500 tests a day with a view to trying to get 20 more. And the news agenda was just the right time. It was just right at the start of that testing agenda when the timing was just right. And I think we pretty much did every national TV station, every national newspaper, just everything in about 3 days, from the Today program to 10 o'clock news and everything in between. And and part of that was timing, part of that's messaging, part of that's narrative, and having enough closeness to where the story is going to be in 2 days' time, so that you can craft your narrative to hit that future story. And I think there an agency can really support in getting that distribution. But I think quite often, as the founder, you have a better sense of where the story is going to be. So I think you need to have strong views as to where the story is going to move to, where you think the interest is going to be, and how you play to that. Because that's really the only part that the agency can't give you that. You've got to be in a position to say, well, this is what I believe and that's where it's going, and then you can craft the narrative together.
Amazing. So, and it's obviously been very important to talk about these issues while this pandemic's been going on, to get that access to partners via the media, of course. Simon, during the pandemic, which is ongoing, let's face it, there's been lots of stuff in the media about investors either pulling or revising offers, sometimes ghosting startups. That's one narrative, and on the other side, we've heard reports of investors doubling down. In fact, actually, oddly enough. So there's lots of sort of debate in the media about what's going on. What do you think? What role has PR played for you during this PR period? I mean, how does it compare to, say, business as usual, compared to the normal sort of kinds of communication strategy that you've seen startups have employed or investors?
I think it's definitely been different to business as usual in a whole bunch of ways. I think from a company portfolio company perspective, in a way, journalists, particularly outside the tech industry, if it's not a COVID angle, they don't really care over the last 12 weeks. And so it's been interesting where some companies have sort of pulled back a little bit from trying to shout about what they're doing, whereas others who have a more relevant or newsworthy story that's related to either lockdown or COVID specifically, like what Caroline's been doing, have had a great time and taken advantage of that. From a VC perspective, I think times like these call for authenticity and straight talking and clarity. And so, in a sense, we've spent a little less time trying to work with the media over the last few weeks and more time on our own direct communications channels, speaking directly first to our close community of founders and portfolio, and trying to deliver clarity in a confusing environment about what's really going on, what support programs might be available, who's really investing, that kind of thing. And then trying to use our more public platform as a way to, campaign and influence in a way that's helpful for the community. So, talking to journalists, but also talking to politicians, arguing for support schemes, things like the future funds, calling out unfairness or problems where things aren't working. There've been lots of those over the last few weeks.
Yeah.
And frankly, there's been a bit of sharing some good news stories as well in our ecosystem, because I think we all need a little bit of that.
Yeah, Cordelia, I presume you're going to say that it's definitely not been business as usual, but what's been markedly different for you running PR and comms during the pandemic versus, the old days?
I mean, not business as usual, absolutely, you're right. I mean, and to Simon's point, it has been a lot of people bedding down, investors talking to their portfolio, etc., and journalists not interested in stories unless there's some COVID angle. However, what I think's really been interesting is the change in what becomes front-end news. So for years, for example, we've been trying to position certain investors as EIS experts and, strong on EIS funding and funds. And suddenly that's front page news because of the future fund and whether you qualify for it or not. And so, and same with SEIS, even VCT funds. So suddenly things that have been back-end news that we've been fighting to get journalists to write about maybe once a year at the end of the financial cycle, suddenly EIS, SEIS, VCT weren't just in the back end of the business pages, but were in the main part of papers. And I thought that's been fascinating to see, and a very good thing because it's educated a wider market on the way our ecosystem works and the elements of the finance and the things that are important to startups. I mean, had people really even heard of startups and scale-ups properly before the Future Fund was on the front page of every paper, that it mattered so much to the government that they had to actually create something to help save startups. I think it has changed the news agenda, and I think it's created a focus on startup and scale-up and high-growth tech community that just wasn't there before, which is a positive thing.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yes. I guess that there were it did put the tech agenda back on the front pages briefly, I guess, amid all the other news. David, on your experience running marketing across Europe and beyond for Google, and you're being a CMO in the scale-up world, of course, now, how would you advise viewers and listeners on breaking down their marketing needs and what budget and resources you would assign to a PR agency?
So that's the kind of $1 million question. And I think the key thing here is to come back to a point that Caroline raised. It's around business and brand objectives. So it's understanding your funnel fully. So understanding all how are you breaking down your funnel? What's the structure of that funnel that you're investing in? And how do you want to split your resources that you have between them? And just making sure that you move away from putting all of it into the moment when there's a commercial consideration going on and start to think about that kind of full life cycle. So putting some at the top of the funnel where we're looking at brand enhancing activities, press articles, those kind of good things, awards, but also thinking from a PR angle as well around the bottom of the funnel where you've got existing customers. And some of the best work that I've seen PR agencies do is actually about storytelling with customers, getting to those customers, getting the customers to tell your story and to pass the message on. So I'd think about the business objectives, and apologies for the fact that hoovering is going on outside my door here. So apologies for that noise. So I really encourage people to think about how they split it across that. And then really, as they look at the unit economics of their business, start to think about the unit economics instead of the entire marketing funnel, start to break it down to maybe, if you break it into 4 stages, see, think, do, care is a good way of looking at it. Think about how you put the money across those 4 steps.
See, think, do,
care. So see, are people seeing you? Do they know you exist? Do they know you're a thing? Think, I might want to do something with them at some point in my life. Do, I need to do something with you now. Care, I've done something with you and I want to tell other people about it.
Right.
So see, think, do, care. It's a simple, there's many funnel structures that you can use. That's the one that I happen to like.
Nothing like keep it simple, stupid, right? So how does David's approach tally with your thinking, Caroline, for instance?
Put myself on mute there for a second. I love that framework. I think that's really great. And I think I'll probably start using that a lot more internally in the business. I don't think we've thought about the funnel in that way so much. I think like most startups, our focus has been on driving sales and really focusing on tactics that build relationships that support on the sales. But again, with a very focus on the inbound. So how do we drive excitement? How do we drive interest? And how do we find the kind of narrative that brings people to us rather than us having to go to them? And so PR has been an important part of that strategy for us. But I think one of the things that I would say is that we were very focused on very simple messaging and trying to distill the message down, because I think marketing is all distillation in the end. And so really for the first 3 years of the business with Fluidly, we focused on just trying to land our name, Fluidly, the category, cash flow, and then what was different about us, AI. And we just went Fluidly, cash flow, AI, Fluidly, cash flow, AI. And that was all the message was. There was no real difference to that. And anytime someone tries to say, well, we're trying to message something else, I would say, no, we're just going to land our name, the category, and AI. And that was it. And I think it's having that willingness to kind of go over the same message again and again and again and again. That actually what lands. And I think too often you might find a different hook each time to make it interesting, like something that's contemporary or something that's relevant at the moment. It's got a COVID twist. So cash flow for businesses at the moment is obviously really important. But we would be very clear that whilst we're looking for the hook, the overall thread of the messaging that we're sending was absolutely consistent, down to the language that we use, the reasons to believe that we'd use. We were very, very clear on our messaging and our value proposition overall and the key features we wanted to put across, and we would not deviate for years and years across that.
Yes, I'm sure there's a few politicians who've certainly been to the similar kinds of schools about messaging. Simon, would you concur that with Caroline and with David as well about this approach?
I would definitely defer to the experts and those who are doing it. I think I'd just add a couple of specific things. On consumer companies, I think quite often, the wrong priorities are put in the wrong order early on versus late on. Quite often early on, you're probably not going to be able to measure your brand awareness in the context of the population if you're very small, and you're not necessarily going to acquire lots of users. But what you can do is really, as David was talking about, kind of supercharge the advocacy that you already have from your a customer base that might be small but already quite pleased and loyal. What you can do is impact your SEO, which quite often is very directly measurable in terms of flow of traffic and impact on the funnel. And then also you can start to think about the impact of the sort of trust that you get from having users first see you, or potential customers first see you in the media, in terms of how those people then convert through your funnel. And all of that you can do quite early. Whereas probably what you're not going to do is kind of drive massive numbers. I think actually conversely, B2B companies often think about PR way too late. It's sort of not seen as a priority at any point, and then it just doesn't get done because you're all about sales. And actually, kind of conversely, the bigger ticket you're selling, the fewer bigger customers that you need as a B2B company, the more likely it is that you might find that one great lead from that one article in that one industry journal. And so it actually might be worth investing on that quite early on in a way that doesn't make sense if you're only going to acquire a handful of consumer users for your consumer business. So add those few things.
I see. Cordelia, do you follow this 4-point plan that David suggested, or?
Yeah, I love the 4-point plan. I'm definitely using that as well. Changing the front page of our website from now on. But I mean, for us, it starts with messaging and positioning and being really clear on that, and then building that up. So this phrase that I always use with the team is being consistent and persistent. And it's what Caroline said. She had her 3 main messages. Just keep saying them again and again and again. But ultimately, what you're looking for is to meet, and I said it once already, but repeat myself, business objectives. And so figure out what they are. PR shouldn't be a nice to have. PR should be helping you achieve your bottom line. And so you want to sell, great, that should be the objective. You want to raise funds, great, that should be the objective. You want to hire, great. But don't just do it because it's something you think you ought to do. Be very clear on the objectives and work towards those.
David, when you've ever hired external agencies, what sort of questions would you ask of an agency to make an informed decision about which one to hire? Would you go on recommendations, or would you do lots of interviewing? How would you go about it?
So Cordelia knows this process very well, as FieldHouse came through one of my RFP processes to win out completely. So kudos to them. The way I would do it is I would share as much information as I could with my long list of agencies. So I'd put a long list of agencies together based on recommendations. So recommendations from other people in the industry, people that you know, just reaching out and asking people. So, reach out on LinkedIn to people that you think might have a good idea on this and say, hey, which agencies do you really like? Which ones deliver well? And then share as much as you can. So what I've seen in RFP processes that people have executed that haven't worked particularly well is where they don't share enough data and they expect the agency to kind of miraculously read the minds of the people in the organization. So it's all about share a great briefing deck, as much information as you can, get them together, do a one-on-one Zoom hangout, whatever video technology you use, call with them and explain it to them. Give them time to ask questions. Make it very, very friendly. Allow them, if necessary, to come in and have a little wander around the office to get a feel of the kind of zing of the location, assuming we have offices in the future. And then go through a long listing process where you say, look, here's my 5 or 6 agencies I'm chatting to. They come in, they do a pitch, they all use the same pitch structure, and then actually grade them. Have a really nice matrix there that you're looking at and saying, these are the things that we're thinking about, and have a group of people from across the business grade them, then get to a short list and make a decision. So really, it's all about structure. It's all about lots of communication, and also respect the agencies, give them feedback, spend time after the fact. If they don't make it through, they've put time in, go back and give them some feedback and say, hey, you're amazing. This is why you didn't make it to the short list, or this is why you didn't win the contract.
Is that helpful, Cordelia, that you've when you get that kind of feedback?
Absolutely, and the brief is the most important thing, as David says. And how can we possibly present ourselves well to any company if they don't tell us what it is they're actually looking for? And then if we don't win, which unfortunately we don't always win, then to know why, so that we can do it better next time. And sometimes it's just not a fit, and that's totally fair. And sometimes we'll have missed something, and so we need to know that for next time.
Caroline, sorry, did I interrupt?
No, I'll say, can I comment as well? Because I think that David had a brilliant process because he knows the area, he's an expert in marketing. But I think for a lot of startups, that you don't necessarily know what you're an incompetent buyer. You don't really know what you should be buying, and you don't really know how you should be assessing. So for me, a lot of it was about yes, we did do such a long big process in terms of 5 or 6 agencies, but we did talk to 2 or 3, which we found through recommendation. But then it was a real question of trying to understand what, that we could explain our position, and also where we needed support. And particularly, I think for us, some of the evaluation criteria were, well, first of all, everyone has a director pitch, of course, but who's actually going to work on the business day to day? And actually, what do I think about the quality of the team all the way through to the most junior? Because it's not about who you get on the pitch day, it's who you work with day to day. And then secondly, I think a lot of agencies are very good for 3 months. And then they kind of run out of ideas and they run out of contacts. And frankly, if you get one of those, you should switch at 3 months. And it's, and actually I know people that have done a switching every 3 month strategy and it kind of works for them, but I don't recommend it, because what you're really looking for is an agency that can come up with loads of ideas. And, that can, our mission at Fluid is to help business owners sleep better. And one of the first things that FieldHouse did was say, do you know it's National Sleep Day? Why didn't we do something around sleep and how business owners can sleep? And it's you're looking for someone that's going to bring you ideas that are relevant to your brand and relevant to the problem, and aren't going to run out of those kind of contacts and ideas after the first few months, but can actually have that relationship going forward. So those were the things I was looking for. But it certainly wasn't a huge or very structured brief process. It was almost looking for an agency that could say, look, this is what I know and what I don't know. Can you fill all the gaps out for us?
It's not dissimilar to hiring almost a creative agency, I suppose, in some way.
Yeah.
Obviously you've had a lot of success with your COVID-19 testing network, but outside of that, what sort of PRs the companies you've been involved in achieved that you thought had the biggest impact? Was there any particular reason that happened that way?
Yeah, I guess, I've been a serial entrepreneur, so I've started a number of businesses, and I think the easiest press to get, and it's perhaps always not the most useful, is all kind of like the female entrepreneur starts business launch type stuff, or you've raised some money. For me, that's kind of, it's almost a vanity piece that you don't need as a founder, and you don't necessarily want, because it can skew the brand about an individual rather than about the company. So I think we're really trying to focus on trying to find stories that are place you as a thought leader in the categories that you want to be known for, and the hooks are about the business or the product or the customer, rather than necessarily the easy to find PR that you can kind of get and you can probably manage yourself. That's not to say that's not relevant, particularly with talent attraction, but or a door opening. But the most useful pieces of PR for us have been the ones that have placed us as a participant in a relevant conversation, whether that's about cash flow in times of crisis, which is where our focus is right now, or for the testing network about we're here and we're going to do testing, and we think the centralized strategy versus a kind of small boats and distributed strategy needs to be evaluated. And that's pieces.
That's a very, very good point. Cordelia, you probably have been faced by clients who've wanted to say, I've got a great personal story, and and you've had to counsel them about whether or not that's a good idea for the company, or whether it moves the needle. How do you distinguish between a PR strategy that's going to, maybe, big up the founder, I suppose, or something else, versus something that actually moves the needle? And do you sometimes have to dissuade them from doing something that's going to waste their money?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a balance, right? So sometimes the founder story might be the best and only story that the company has, and so we need to go with that, especially at launch. And if it's a big personality or somebody who's well known, or unfortunately, a woman, or so we do sometimes have to go with that, but it has to be for a purpose. And the company's story itself, and what they're trying to do, and what product they're trying to sell, and their focus should be the main part of the story. And sometimes saying no to a client or a prospective client is the hardest thing, but that's part of our job too, to say no, this isn't a story. And I suppose you can then move on to some of that, because it isn't all about news. You want to be taking positions on issues and showing your expertise. And so the founder can sometimes have a little piece of that action, as opposed to being part of the main news story in terms of the launch or in what they're trying to do. So it's balancing that out. Yeah.
I guess there's sometimes call for personal profiles and what have you, I guess.
Well, it's all about relationships, isn't it? It's a people business.
Yeah. True, very true. Well, we're going to head to our final poll now for this workshop and webinar. So the final poll is: how much budget do you think you should allocate for PR to get results, assuming it was able to help achieve the growth objectives you have? So the options are less than £1,000 per month, more than 1,000, between 1,000 and 3,000, between 2,000 and 5,000, and more than 5,000. I'm interested to know this myself, to know how much people are spending on this kind of thing. I would have say a lot of. Cordelia, would you say that sounds a bit low, actually, to some extent? Would you say? Depends.
Well, this is a startup workshop, remember?
Right. So this is talking early stage.
And so,
early stage.
I take the opportunity, Mike, just to say as well that a lot of agencies that are focused on this growth space find it difficult to work with startups, because they don't have the budget, and they shouldn't be spending huge budgets on PR. And that's why, as you kindly referenced earlier, we launched Basecamp, which is a PR by subscription. Very, very low monthly rate.
I'm just going to interrupt you and just tell our participants to vote. Yeah. Keep voting, because it's not the end of the quiz. Keep voting in that poll. Carry on, Cordelia.
It's a way of feeding opportunities through to startups at a price they can actually afford. In transparency, £500 a month, and we don't do any of the background work. We don't do we don't do the execution, the strategy, all the really interesting, meaty PR stuff. But startups should start doing PR as early as they possibly can, and this is one of the ways they can do that, is by signing up to something like Basecamp, where they can at least enter awards, know that events are going on, join conversations, as Caroline was saying, that a journalist is looking for comment for this Sunday's paper or whatever it might be. And so we feed those through, and it's a way to get startups involved. And that's why this quiz has got these sorts of pricings on it, because we wouldn't overcharge a startup, because we don't think they should spend their money on that.
And it looks like we've got the results in now, and the majority is between 3,000 and 5,000. Caroline, does that ring true for you?
I think we started on a lot less. We would just do it internal efforts, use a bit of freelance from time to time, and just get kind of started. But now I think a bit more established, and looking to have it, work with an external agency a bit more formally. Yeah, that rings true.
Yeah. Simon, what would you say to an entrepreneur who is going to allocate budget to this?
I think those ranges seem pretty reasonable for startups. We have lots of portfolio companies that spend more than £5,000, even in some cases more than £10,000 or £12,000 on a PR agency, and really it's dependent on scale. To some extent, it's like saying how many thousands of pounds should a company spend on Facebook marketing. It's not. It's very stage relevant, budget relevant, and objectives relevant question. So, I guess at the earlier stages, I would just think about, how much are you spending on SEO, how much are you spending on your paid marketing channels, and then what's a relevant amount of money that's going to support those channels.
Yeah, great. David, what's your comment on those results, and what would you advise?
So I'd advise people to look at their turnover, and obviously depending on what stage of their business that they're at, look at their turnover and figure out what percentage of that turnover should really be going into the marketing channel, and figure that out. And it's probably, I imagine, somewhere between 4% and 10% of that, including kind of marketing, salary, etc., and all agencies, and then figure out addressing, again, coming back to my funnel point, how you want to split it. Some agencies will scrimp and save and say, I'm going to put £1,000 a month into PR, but I'm going to put £100,000 a month into PPC. That makes no sense. It's about the ratios.
Great. Well, we've had a bunch of questions come in from our audience now, so let's move to some of these questions. Tiante is asking, for each early stage startup that may not be able to afford external PR, what are some PR efforts worth pursuing in the meantime? How can you bootstrap? Cordelia?
Well, obviously I would say Basecamp is the place to start, but really the place to start is what news hooks can you come up with, and also build relationships with journalists. Go to events, ask for introductions, email them cold. Journalists are always happy to hear from founders.
I've got a good question here from Emily Sims, what would your advice be to startups looking to form direct relationships with journalists? Caroline, you mentioned that certainly trade press is good for that kind of strategy.
Yeah, I think meeting through through events, as Cordelia mentioned, but also conversations on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Many journalists are active, just contributing, commenting on articles, sharing articles that you think might be relevant to them, or news excerpts, interests, gossip, rumor, things you've heard. So you can be more of a two-way exchange of information that is relevant. I might say to a journalist that I know, oh, by the way, did you see this? Or did you hear about that? And that can be a good way of it kind of exchanging and building a relationship. But I think also the sort of entry of awards, and can be a really good and easy way to kind of get known and get buzz.
Yeah, you can get some external validation from, winning an award or something, because you're obviously, been up in front of some judges. But I guess the other thing that you're saying, I think I want to kind of just back you up there, Caroline, by saying that I think that a lot of startups can really do well by engaging with journalists on topics that they're writing about, that is in the news, and it's because you're in the news business, so that really helps. Let's get another question in here. We've got let's see now. So I'm just gonna a question from Jessica Hale: should you engage a PR agency if you already employ and a comms manager in-house? David, what's your view?
I think I already commented on that one down towards the bottom. My comment was absolutely. So, a single person writing everything they have to write on their own, if they're a genius, fantastic. I'm not a genius. The people I work with are amazing, but not geniuses. Getting a team together to actually brainstorm stuff really, really works. So it's a partnership. It's a virtual team. Having those extra people, those extra relationships, those extra ideas really, really works.
Exactly. And I think we're just going to squeeze one more in here. I think, Cordelia, this is a good one for you. If you're a company that's really trying to kind of shoot for a global audience, perhaps maybe a consumer company that's going to be trying to scale in the US or something, would it be better to go with one PR agency to cover the whole world, or having local agencies in each market? I know perhaps, for instance, you're probably going to get a French agency to work on the French market, would you say? Or what's your advice on that?
What we always say is that we can get to all English-speaking media. So I think one UK agency can probably, if they're good and if they have the right relationships in the right sectors, then they can probably help here and in the States, at least to get you going. Certainly in terms of languages, though, I think you need to go to a local agency. And so France, Germany, Spain, Italy, you really would want to have a local agency there to speak to the journalist in the local language, because that's respectful. But then in time, you would need to get a local agency in, for example, the States, or a bigger agency that has either partnerships with other agencies across the world or an agency that has offices across the world. We have relationships with agencies in France and Germany, San Francisco and New York. So we can quite easily partner with them, and we become a hub and are able to manage the global program just from one place, which is very easy for the company. But as a starting point, English speaking, most London agencies should be able to do that for you.
Great. Right, we're going to do a round robin now of concluding remarks, some sort of some standout advice perhaps that you could give to early stage startups in dealing with PR. Perhaps I could start with you, Simon.
Yeah, I think I would echo some of what we've been saying before. It's very outcomes focused, and don't have too many different outcomes at different stages. Know what are the 1 or 2 or 3 priorities that you have in terms of getting your message out or acquiring customers or something else. And then be really laser focused about how you use PR to focus on that. Great.
Caroline?
I think, yeah, I just totally echo that. And also find the narrative. Like most of the time, you're actually a lot more boring than you think you are as a founder, or the business might be. Everyone's raising money all the time. Everyone's launching businesses all the time. Everyone's got new products all the time. So how do you actually find the narrative of interest to the actual consumer of the media? So, and actually that's often about their world, not your world. And it's about understanding where their world is, where it's going to go next, and how you can slot into that conversation rather than trying to push your agenda about what you want to say. Yes, absolutely be clear about what messages you want to say are, but fit it into their world rather than trying to go the other way.
Yeah, I agree. Often I find founders actually a little bit muddled about what actual message they want to put out, interestingly enough. David, what's some of the breakout kind of thoughts you have about just starting from scratch when you're going to do this?
So I'm going to build on some of the comments that have already come across. And the thing that I always encourage teams to do is to sit down and have a document that you entitle talking points or something similar. So if you've got a talking points document, a Google Doc that everybody shares and that people update over time, because things happen, you add things in, what's the standard data points that you're all going to come up with? So if you've got multiple spokespeople in the organization and you're all actually saying completely different things, that's not great. So a single talking points document that tells your history, why you're doing it, who your customers are, who you're trying to address, what your stories are. It then starts to become your Bible. And you can start to build out this Bible. If you've got a great agency, the agency will work with you on those talking points. If you've not got to an agency stage yet, then you start to build that yourself. The leadership team build it, the marketing team build it, the product team are probably involved in it. And one of the key principles, guiding principles for that would be to keep ego out of it. So people often try and write a long list of how amazing they are and how wonderful they are and how they, stuff that they really want. Think about the people who are going to read it. Does it touch them? Do you have empathy for those people? Both your target consumers of the information and also the journalists and the people that matter out there. So have empathy for those people and tell it in the words of the customer.
And Cordelia, finally, TheEuropas.
I mean, it's really quite straightforward. What do you want to say? Who do you want to say it to? And when is the right time to say it? And the final point is, PR should change your business. And you will know if it's working. If it's not working, change it. But PR should make a difference. Never forget it.
Very good point. Exactly. And obviously, when you're a founder, it's going to have to be part of your strategy, whether you like it or not. Well, that has been a fantastic session. I've certainly learnt a few tricks myself. I might be noting those down for when I deal with PR people. But it's been a great to chat to everybody. Brilliant contributions. I just want to say, finally, thank you to our panelists, Cordelia Meacher from FieldHouse Associates and the newly launched Basecamp, Simon Menashe from MMC Ventures, Caroline Plumb, OBE of Fluidly and the COVID-19 Volunteer Testing Network, David Keane, former Head of Marketing Strategy and Operations for Google in EMEA. And it's from me, Mike Butcher from TechCrunch. Thank you all for joining us. The full recording, as well as the results of the polls, will be shared with you soon, along with contact details in case you want to keep the conversation going. You'll also join us, hopefully, in the Europas Slack community before, during, and after these sessions. Just check your email for an invite from me to jump into that. So you've been attending the Europas 2020 session on comms and PR for startups. Thanks very much for joining. Goodbye.